Well, good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you yesterday for all the waves in the comments. As you may recall, Monday I did say, though, it was a pre-recorded show. I was away for just a day, but it's good to be back because we have so much to talk about. Obviously, Hunter Biden's trial. We'll be talking about the Biden administration's. How do you like the way the news is covering it? The crackdown on illegal immigration. Have you looked at what it actually proposes? I think crackdown is a very, very, very strong word. So we'll be talking about that as well. A couple other miscellaneous items to get to. First of all, in breaking news, there was an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, but it was foiled, and the army has fought back to kill one assailant. The Lebanese army thwarted an attack by a gunman on the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon this morning in Beirut. One assailant was reportedly killed. A Lebanese security official told the Associated Press that there were 4 assailants, including one who drove them to the site and 3 who opened fire. One shooter was killed, 1 escaped, and the 3rd was wounded and detained by the military. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut said small arms fire was reported in the vicinity of its entrance around 8:34 a.m. local time, but its facility and team were safe. Investigations are underway, and we are still in close contact with host country law enforcement. So just starting with some breaking news. There we go. We got some virtual waves coming in. Here's some comments from viewers that we missed yesterday. So will there be a class action lawsuit for those who lost their job if they didn't submit and get the jab? This is in reference to the conversation we've been having about Dr. Fauci. This is appalling, and Fauci and others should be held accountable for the damage he caused directly or indirectly, not only mentally, financially, but children who fell behind. And personally for me, he has blood on his hands. I lost 3 family members in 2020 as a result of neglect for health issues not COVID related, so they were ignored and not seen. And shame on the medical professional and science who carried out this deadly assault. Yes, we talked about the idea that we had to follow the science. Now we're learning about exactly what that meant. The trust has been broken, and how many more lives will be lost because of this lie? How can this be repaired? I don't know. I don't know if the faith in science, in this case, in the National Institute of Health, if it can be repaired. The fact is they don't care, and I actually think the results were exactly as they were hoping to achieve by design. Everyone was impacted. There were few winners, if any, in my opinion. Thank you for that comment. Yes, we learned about exactly what it meant to follow the science. Another comment. I thought of the convicted felon label that the left will now use ad nauseum, and it occurred to me the way they love to pardon and release felons, Trump may be okay after all. I don't think so. I don't see a pardon coming his way. I know Mitt Romney said, of all people who we know does not have any, there's no love lost between him and Trump. He was suggesting that Biden should have pardoned Trump right away, because then he could have taken the high road and said, I'm the bigger man, he's the littler man. That, of course, did not happen. I also want to warn you, I don't know if it'll come through, but they're doing a little sweeping on Marcus Street. Beautiful, historic Marcus Street. So you may hear that in the background. I apologize. There it goes. But back to the convicted felon label. We know the media is already in full use of the word, I should say. Biden, on the other hand, they're making it a big story that he used it for the first time. And I don't know if it was really for the first time. But President Biden accurately labeled, according to Mediaite, former President Donald Trump as a convicted felon at a Connecticut fundraising event, perhaps signaling an aggressive campaign approach. Perhaps signaling, and that's aggressive. This is what it was all about in the long run. It was the salacious details they could get during the trial, and then, of course, no matter what happens, and they know it's going to be overturned, they don't care about that, because for the time being, in this window, they can call him a convicted felon, and they think that is voting gold. They think that will swing the swing states towards Biden. Biden said at a fundraising event in Connecticut, for the first time in American history, a former president that is a convicted felon is now seeking the office of the presidency. But as disturbing as that is, more damaging is the all-out assault Donald Trump is making on the American system of justice. And I see that's a talking point now of how dangerous it is that that Trump is sowing these seeds of doubt with the justice system. The only people that sow those seeds of doubt are the people that convicted him in the, as so many have said, sham trial. The trial that was predetermined, essentially, with its location, with its judge, with its jury, of what the verdict would be. So if there's anybody sowing seeds of doubt in the justice system, or there's an attack on the justice system, it's not Trump. It's the original... it's Alvin Bragg. It's all these people who have said from the beginning they're going to get Trump. And I've got something on Bragg to bring up here in just a little bit. But also, isn't this coming from the party, well, one that ignores the Supreme Court's decision, like we've seen in the student debt forgiveness with Biden, but also the party that has been attacking the Supreme Court for years now, talking about stacking the Supreme Court, getting more justices on there, of course, questioning everything that the conservative justices do behind the scenes. And we know Clarence Thomas gave a really impassioned speech on that not that long ago, saying some very strong words about exactly how he feels the media is trying to corrupt, or not corrupt's not the right word, but trying to attack the Supreme Court in a way that discredits them. And you also can't ignore the fact that there was that devastating leak from the Supreme Court in regards to Roe v. Wade. So again, it's a little disingenuous, just like this whole idea of being a threat on democracy and a threat to the norms and the institutions, as they are destroying norms and institutions, makes it just a little hard to accept them at their word. According to NBC News, Biden repeated that note Monday night. Biden made similar remarks Monday, saying it's reckless and dangerous for anyone to say that's rigged just because they don't like the outcome. Something snapped in this guy, for real. It's literally driving him crazy. Trump is unhinged. And we're going to talk about Biden in this new piece out. I think it was with the Wall Street Journal, but don't quote me on that. I don't think it was Washington Post. I think it was Wall Street Journal. Boy, that seems unlikely, though. But anyway, about some people really concerned about Biden's health behind the scenes, mental health behind the scenes. So it's interesting to use terms like unhinged, driving him crazy. But I think that's going to be just as much a part of this, meaning calling him a convicted felon is going to be just as much a part of them saying that he is a threat to democracy because he's questioning our judicial system, which is really interesting. Now, I don't have much faith in what's going to happen with the Hunter trial, but I'd be curious to see how that's handled if he is found guilty. And I do know, and I know I've made this point, and we're going to talk about Hunter in just a moment, but I know I've made this point numerous times on the program in the past, but I think it's worth noting that when you and I are lectured so much about guns and the Second Amendment and, banning certain guns and really telling law-abiding citizens that they shouldn't be gun owners, essentially, that Hunter is up on gun charges and now it's almost ignored, or it would have been ignored. It's just, again, disingenuous. It's hypocritical. But we're going to talk about that because the media is saying, and they've done this in the past, so all this, it comes as no surprise to anybody who's watched it long enough. But it's, because of this trial against Hunter Biden, it shows that the system is fair. It shows that there's no two-tiered justice system. As he's pleasantly in a court in Delaware, and we don't have to go through all the comparisons. When Trump was in New York City, of course, you could see how different they are. But also that means that we have to ignore the fact that he was given a sweetheart deal that his lawyers were too arrogant to take, or they were too aggressive. They got too cocky and thought they could get everything they wanted and then some. And when that backfired, now the hands were forced and they had to have the trial. But we're going to get into that. I don't want to get on tangents already this morning. I just feel like we have so much to catch up on. But yes, it's a big deal that Biden called Trump a convicted felon, which I think we all predicted that before the case was even over. Also, this idea, and I don't think we're surprised by this either, but that the new line will be that he is a threat to the system of justice here in America, when we actually know the real threat is the case they brought against him. the ones that plant this idea of the weaponization of the judicial system, going after your political opponents, the persecution and prosecution, all of that. That ties in with, and of course the media is running with it in general. As CNN, Biden calls Trump convicted felon as he sharpens attacks on campaign trail. Did they write this already just to make it an easy workday for them so they could post it? Because is anybody surprised by this? We've talked about it since really the verdict and before. The remarks, building on comments delivered from the White House following the verdict in Trump's criminal hush money case in New York, mark the first time Biden has mentioned Trump's conviction in a campaign setting. The president is refining his campaign trail attacks on the presumptive Republican nominee with less than a month to go until they face off in the first general election debate. And we know it'll come up in the debate. We know that'll be a major topic. And we know he'll continue to bring up and hoping to goad Trump into some type of almost fight, goad him by saying that he's a convicted felon. Isn't that interesting? Even if you have a case that's very questionable, and most legal experts say that it will be overturned, that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they just got what they wanted, which was a convicted felon label. So when they talk about a threat to democracy, they know that there's a likely chance that this is all going to go away, but it doesn't matter. They don't say, well, let's wait for that system to work out. Asked by a reporter, and listen to this will be another line that they used a lot. Asked by a reporter at the White House later that day about Trump's accusation that he was behind the former president's conviction, Biden smiled and paused. I like how they write this, so poetic. Biden smiled and paused. Quote, "I didn't know I was that powerful," he said. It's pretty laughable. It's so predictable. It's so hypocritical, and there's no surprise here. When we come back, I'm just going to tell you a quick thing about Bragg. We're going to go through some random stories, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, which of course is the Hunter trial and also the executive order by the president. The media today is running with the strongest policy in years, as if we don't know where the real strong policies came from. The least amount of illegal immigrants crossing the border in years. I wonder how many years exactly. It's a point they're going to use because they know voters are very concerned, number one or number two, depending on what poll you read, with immigration. So even though after 3.5 years of saying he could do nothing, now he's doing something and blaming it on Republicans, and it's just a twist in logic for you to support it. But also, you've got the other side, his side, the same people that are upset with him on his position with Israel, saying that this is going to cause more progressive votes, this policy. And I've got a couple examples of that, of the kind of the warning shots to Biden saying, this isn't good. You're looking Trump-esque. So we'll talk about that as well. Stay with us. We're running just a tad bit late. We're just getting started here on Frankly Speaking. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back. Our beautiful view overlooking Marcus Street as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. A little bit of housekeeping here. For tomorrow's Steuben Senior Services Fund section of our program, the interview section, we'll be talking with fan favorite, former Congressman Joe Sempolinski. So do not miss that. That is tomorrow, right around 7 o'clock. He'll be in the studio, and I know he really is a fan favorite. So if you have any questions for the former Congressman Joe Sempolinski, please feel free to send them in at any time. A comment from a viewer: convicted felon doesn't really carry any weight when there's a long list of felon-friendly employers, including the federal government. Well, that is a fair point. Speaking of that convicted felon label, this is a little more New York City centric, but I think it's really important to show you exactly why people are losing faith or have lost faith in the judicial system and know that it's now a weaponized judicial system. On Saturday, a knife-wielding thief severely stabbed a security guard at a Midtown Manhattan, Duane Reade, and threatened a shopper. Roughly 12 hours later, a strap hanger was shot in the hand as his train pulled into the 86th Street and Lexington Avenue platform. That's life in Manhattan, where transit crime, assault, and shoplifting are raging. Ermal Gura of Staten Island said the city has changed so much. She barely escaped the drugstore thief. We have to watch our backs in the stores and on the subways. Well, that's because Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg doesn't have New Yorkers' backs, says Betsy McKay. Thursday, minutes after securing a guilty verdict against former President Donald Trump on 34 counts, Bragg boasted, "I did my job." Bragg's not doing his job. The mainstream media is gushing with adulation. But New Yorkers living in constant fear should find Bragg's stardom nauseating. He's being hailed as a hero, but he's a menace. Bragg should prioritize jailing violent criminals and repeat offenders, including the shoplifting gangs that are forcing stores to close. Since the year before Bragg took office, grand larceny crimes, now that's theft of goods worth over $1,000, are up 33%. And here's the zinger. Despite spending years and millions of dollars pursuing Trump, Bragg claims he lacks the resources to bring thieves to trial. In December of 2022, with the DA's investigation of Trump in full swing, cops arrested Charles Lindsay and charged him with 4 heists in 1 week at a high-end Madison Avenue boutiques, where he allegedly had stolen nearly $25,000 in goods. 4 grand larceny charges. Lindsay was known to belong to a gang targeting the area and had a long rap sheet already. Okay, now we've learned about Lindsay. Yet the DA's office let Lindsay off, dropping the charges if he consented, listen to this, consented to 5 counseling sessions. This sounds as not good as Hunter Biden's original deal was. So completely dropped the charges when he shoplifted nearly $25,000 or maybe more than $25,000 worth of goods. And they dropped the charges if he consented to 5 counseling sessions. Do you believe counseling sessions work when you're part of a gang that is specifically shoplifting? I mean, I don't know if it's a counseling session on why are you shoplifting. I'm not sure. Doesn't seem like the most successful game plan. Oh, by the way, bonus, he didn't even have to pay for the goods. So I guess you get $25,000 to go to 5 counseling sessions. Bragg's office said prosecutors had too much on their plates, just too busy to try the case. They have 300 prosecutors in Bragg's office, so what exactly are they working on? Well, it's definitely not getting criminals off the street, says Betsy McKay. 2 months after Lindsay got his sweetheart deal, he was nailed for packing a pistol and mugging a 14-year-old in a Brooklyn playground. 2 months after that sweetheart deal. In that case, the Brooklyn's DA office had the good sense to finally ask for $100,000 bail. Bragg, though, sides with the criminals. That includes fare beaters, people who dodge subway turnstiles, those type of things. New York State's bizarre criminal justice reforms, and I know that this is New York City centric, but it isn't just affecting New York City, of course it's affecting our area as well, are partly to blame for Manhattan's crime surge, but Bragg refuses to recommend bail or incarceration even when the law permits it. Public anger against Bragg soared in February when the DA released 4 migrant teens charged with beating up 2 cops in Times Square. No bail was required. At that point, 20 Republican state senators sent a letter to Governor Hochul urging her to remove Bragg as DA, explaining, quote, his incredibly poor judgment is matched only by his unwillingness to take criminals off the street. On April 16th, in the midst of his own trial, Trump visited the scene of one of Bragg's biggest mistakes in judgment. That was that bodega in Harlem that I talked about, and I said how at the time I thought that was such an effective campaign move from the Trump campaign. Showing total disdain for the right to self-defense, Bragg in 2022 charged Jose Alba, a clerk at the shop, with second-degree murder after he stabbed a career criminal who had attacked him over a bag of chips. When the public grew outraged, Bragg dropped the charges. The bodega's co-owner told Trump he's still grappling with rampant crime. Trump pledged to straighten New York out, adding Alvin Bragg does nothing that is, to keep New Yorkers safe. After Bragg won his case against Trump, the DA, quote, watched his place in the history books take shape, the Washington Post gushed. That's the problem. New Yorkers need a DA who watches out for them, not for himself. I thought that was a really powerful piece by Betsy McKay. I wanted to mention it to you because it just kind of puts a nice bow on what we've talked about with Bragg and the weaponization against a political opponent. of the judicial system. We've got a couple other things before we get to Hunter. Not too many more things, but we're going to talk about Hunter here in just a few moments. Keep those comments coming in. I have a question for you. I don't know if you want to play one of these mind games early this morning. There is a piece, and I believe it's by Politico. Yes, it is. And the theory here is that the 1980s yuppies, you remember yuppies, young urban professionals? The young urban professionals, the yuppies of the 80s, if it weren't for them, there would be no Donald Trump. How the 1980s yuppies gave us Donald Trump. If it weren't for the young urban professionals of the 1980s, we never have MAGA. What do you think? I just thought it was an interesting piece, or an interesting headline. I did not read the piece because I saw the direction it was headed with what they were saying at the beginning. But the theory itself, your thoughts. All right, some more waves coming in. Thank you. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really do appreciate it. Keep those comments coming in. Did you see that Biden, he was asked by, I think it was Time Magazine, he did a sit-down interview with Time Magazine, and they said some in Israel have suggested that Benjamin Netanyahu was prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Do you believe that? He said, I'm not going to comment on that. But wait, there's more. Then he said, there's every reason for people to draw that conclusion. And a lot of people have rightfully so said, how dare a man who has done everything to prolong this war by tying the hands of Israel, then have the audacity, and he's doing it for political reasons, ironically, Biden that is, and then come out and blame Netanyahu. As, who was it here? Guy Benson said from Fox News, Biden has been incoherently pressuring Israel not to finish the job for months. And there's every reason for people to draw the conclusion that it's been for Biden's own political self-preservation. How soon will Biden demand Israel not defend itself against the attacks in the north? Senator Ted Cruz called it a disgusting lie. Tragically, the Biden White House is the most anti-Israel White House in history. Is there even a single Democrat who will denounce Biden's slander? I just think there's something going. I know today's theme, word of the day, is hypocritical, I suppose. But imagine that, how many times he's called for kind of the slowing down of what's happening in Israel, not giving munitions, lecturing Israel, and then has, some calling it sociopathic, then blaming it on Netanyahu, when we know Biden wants this delay for his own political reasons. Mark Levin said, I want everyone to read what Biden said this morning, and what a loathsome, disgusting, anti-Semitic statement it is. Sorry, this got cut off, so this is paraphrasing. Undermining Netanyahu because Biden demands that Israel surrender so Biden can declare peace in our time for his lousy re-election effort. Biden has mobilized, this isn't Mark Levin anymore, this is a national security advisor for Senator Ted Cruz, Omri Sirin. He said Biden has mobilized unprecedented domestic and international pressure to slow Israel's advance into Gaza. Bonkers campaigns. Politicizes U.S. intel, leaking it. Doing global diplomatic pincher moves. Where the U.S. encourages allies to pressure Israel, then tells the Israelis we can't help them. Halting aid, threatening to halt more aid, specifically if Israel moved into Rafah. The repeated ongoing stunts about aid, airdrops in the pier. Multi-day news cycles about all of the above. Now Biden is saying Netanyahu is prolonging the war for political reasons. Absolutely sociopathic. It is amazing, isn't it? And one just more comment on this. And it was by former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren. He said, no one hears about what is happening in northern Israel. The interview is an inappropriate attack on the political system in Israel. The U.S. should not interfere in what is happening in Israeli politics. And I'm glad that Netanyahu has come out repeatedly and said, we're going to do what we have to do for ourselves, protect ourselves. And as I know, I've quoted a million times, but you don't put out 80% of a fire. So they've got to go in and end Hamas. And Biden forcing them in many instances to drag their feet and delay, and now has the audacity to say that Netanyahu is doing that for political purposes. Also, did you see Chuck Schumer not getting a great response for his stance on Israel. He's been wishy-washy in some ways. The House Republican facing a tough re-election fight is using Chuck Schumer as a political foil, says Politico. Representative Mike Lawler urged attendees of the Jerusalem Post's annual conference in Manhattan Monday to pressure the Senate Majority Leader into bringing the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to the Senate floor. He said right now that is sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk, the highest-ranking Jewish official in American history. Just his mention of his name at the Jerusalem Post drew jeers. The second round of boos for New York senior senator in just as many days, likely inspired by his pivotal condemnation of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We talked about that back in March, and I thought even then there'd be more backlash, and there has been. Following Monday's conference, PR firm NSA Creatives issued a press release announcing the crowd booed Schumer and highlighted Lawler's line of attack. I'm not sure why they give the name of the PR firm. That's weird. The incident reflects Republicans' estimation of cracks in Schumer's base 8 months into the Israel-Hamas war that has divided the Democrat Party and seen public sentiment shift towards sympathizing with Palestinians as their death toll climbs. It's not about the sympathizing with Palestinian citizens. This is how they twist it. You have actually seen at these protests sympathy for Hamas, and I think that needs to be reiterated, because they're not going to reiterate it at Politico or in the mainstream media. Republicans like Lawler, who are in tight election battles, view their party's pro-Israel posture as a winning message for some swing voters in heavily Jewish New York. Now, Schumer's spokesperson said Senator Schumer just secured $14 billion with no conditions for Israel and is not playing these silly partisan games. Anyway, the same accomplishments were referenced at Israel's Israel Day parade that we mentioned earlier in the week. But there at the annual march, Schumer was met by a smattering of boos as he took to the mic to say, "We will defeat Hamas and bring them home." Isn't that interesting? We will defeat Hamas when you tried to really change the outcome of a democratic election. Try to change the outcome of because he wanted Netanyahu gone. He wanted a new vote. Just interesting what's happening there in the Democrat Party and this anti-Israel sentiment that is, you can't even say cropping up anymore, that has become kind of, one of the main issues, one of the biggest concerns for the Biden administration. Now let's get into what you all want to talk about, and that is, there's probably two topics. This laughable executive order on immigration from the Biden administration. We can talk about that, but let's start with Hunter. Want to start with Hunter? Jonathan Turley, who I thought did a fantastic job, and I think he was one of the ones that I started to see the writing on the wall of what was going to happen with the Trump trial, because he was kind of the same mindset as I was, which is, I think this is the way it should go, but it's New York City, and I don't, and it seems like it was predetermined, so this is the way it's actually going to go. Well, he is doing a piece here at the New York Post about Hunter, and he said on the first day of his trial, Hunter Biden spoke to the jury against himself. The prosecutors in his Wilmington, gun trial read long excerpts from Hunter's book on his long addiction to drugs and his self-proclaimed superpower, which was finding crack anytime, anywhere. And this is from his autobiography. And it was in his voice because it was the audiobook. Listening to himself was the president's son, whose counsel had just suggested that Hunter may have had a brief moment where he was drinking as opposed to snorting or smoking. Accordingly, defense counsel Abby Lowell suggested Hunter did not knowingly deny that he was using drugs when he purchased a .38 caliber Colt Cobra. Somehow the argument is that for a brief moment on October 12, 2018, Hunter forgot that he was a superpowered junkie. The problem is that the next prosecution witness is likely to be, again, Hunter Biden. The day after he bought the gun, Hunter was texting a guy named Mookie to score drugs behind a minor league baseball stadium. Mookie appears to have come through for Hunter, since the next day, 2 days after denying that he used drugs, Hunter allegedly texted Hallie Biden that he was waiting for a dealer named Mookie. Then, 2 days after the gun purchase, Hunter texted, I was sleeping on a car smoking crack on 4th Street and Rodney. So again, kind of his own worst enemy in this. The coroner appears less than a mile and a half from the federal courthouse where Hunter is sitting. It is roughly 5 miles from the gun shop where he denied using drugs. Haley will also testify. They claim today is probably when Haley's going to testify. The two Hunter lovers are going to testify. That's going to be, what I've read, could be a very awkward day for Hunter Biden in court. Haley will testify she was the widow of Hunter's deceased brother and started an intimate relationship with Hunter after Bo's death. She was also allegedly doing crack. Yet when Haley saw the gun in the console of Hunter's car, she had the presence of mind to realize he was an unstable addict and was concerned about the gun. She took the gun and threw it into a dumpster behind a restaurant. The brutal start of the hearing raises the question again of why Hunter decided to go to trial. There is no viable defense. The most that the defense can come up with is a claim that someone else may have completed the form, or that he had a moment of sobriety before heading off to meet Mookie. In his book, Hunter describes an addiction that led him to smoke crack almost every 15 minutes. That seems likely to come to mind when you're given a form asking, are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance? Seems like it might pop up in your mind if you are used to smoking every 15 minutes. Certainly, his need for drugs was much on Hunter's mind when he was texting Mookie. Indeed, not long after the purchase, the Biden family held an intervention at their Delaware home to deal with Hunter's raging addiction. These defenses are about as convincing as someone that your client got locked into the... let me try that again. I'm moving too fast because we have so much to cover. These defenses are about as convincing as someone, or as saying that your client got locked into the bank vault after losing his way to the restroom hours after the bank closed. So why present unbelievable defenses? Because it's Wilmington, and this is why I bring up this piece. This is Biden's hometown. The president maintains his residence in the city and remains the town's favorite son. As if the jury needed any reminder, First Lady Jill Biden, sitting behind Hunter, brings home that this is a Biden trial in Bidentown. So you had the opposite when you knew that a far-left New York City courthouse would not be the best spot for Trump. This is the complete opposite. The combination of sympathy for a reformed addict and with the Bidens, and identification with the Bidens could be enough for a jury nullification strategy. The defense is not asking the jury to consider the evidence. It's asking the jury to ignore it. Every juror appeared to confirm knowing someone who had a drug addiction, including siblings or other relatives. Given that panel, Hunter could well take the stand to describe his addiction and lack of clarity of thought. Hunter's book offers moving descriptions of his struggle. Wilmington for Biden is the opposite of Manhattan for Trump. This is a town that overwhelmingly voted for Biden in 2016 and 2020. It is a great jury pool for the defense. Viewed through a nullification defense, it does not matter how absurd the actual defense in the case is. It is merely a pretense. Whether it is sympathy or for a drug addict or a Biden, the defense clearly hopes that the jury will look beyond the evidence and the crime in the case. So that's Jonathan Turley. And that's just to give you a little warning like we did during the Trump trial to say don't use necessarily your common sense to see where this should be headed. You know, you've got a tough on guns administration now calling for a very major law being ignored in the name of Hunter Biden. So never mind what you think the verdict should be. Just prepare for the case itself. All right, we got to take a break because I'm running late. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Keep those waves coming in. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. One of the things that's really interesting, and if you get a chance, if you want to find out more about what's happening with Hunter Biden, I would say the best place to go is the New York Post. Because remember, the New York Post dealt with this. They were the first to break the story about the laptop from hell, as it's called now. And they're using that in the trial, that laptop, which is fascinating. Miranda Devine almost gets giddy, and rightfully so. Because as she said, when the Post broke the story before the 2020 election in October of 2020, publishing evidence from the laptop of Joe Biden's involvement in his family's global influence peddling racket, we were censored by big tech and falsely accused by 51 former intelligence officials of peddling Russian disinformation. And think about that, those 51 former intelligence. Tell me the fix isn't in. There's so many areas now, ever since really the Trump, well, I can't even say administration, since Trump came down the escalator to declare his 2016 intentions, you've seen so many institutions lose credit in their all-out attacks on Trump, all-out protection of Democrats, and this is an example. Then presidential candidate Joe Biden lied to the American people that the laptop was a Russian plant. Is anybody in the media covering this? That's one of the things that I thought was interesting when I saw some coverage yesterday of the Hunter trial, because I thought if someone had watched, and I won't name any specific station I was watching, I'll just say it wasn't Fox. When I was watching it, I thought there are people that up until a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, would have had no idea any of this about Hunter because the media kept it hidden and kept it quiet. Or they called the laptop Russian disinformation, whatever the case may be, and they ignored it. So when the news first broke about that deal falling apart, that Hunter had that sweetheart plea deal, when it fell apart, that was in many instances the first time they had to cover it. So they had to go through the backstory. And I thought about the difference, and trust me, the coverage what I saw wasn't fair. It was very, very biased. But at the same time, it was interesting to see a story now become a story because it forced their hand. But I'll continue. If you were not a reader of this newspaper, meaning the New York Post, and simply believed the Biden lies, Tuesday's courthouse revelations would have come as a bolt from the blue. And she goes through a lot of the history here. We don't have time for it, number one. Number two, you know about the history of it. But she had a really good point, because Hunter said that he introduced Hallie Biden to crack. Now, Hallie was Beau's wife. When Beau passed, became Hunter's lover. She was the one that threw out the gun. And when she threw out the gun, she had been clean for 2 months and remains clean. Now, she is testifying under a grant of immunity to avoid potentially incriminating herself. And this is why I bring it up, just to show you a little bit of where the defense is going to go. In a sign that Hunter plans to throw Hallie under the bus, his lawyer, Abby Lowell, highlighted her grant of immunity to the jury as a reason to treat her testimony with caution. Continuing, he portrayed Hallie as irresponsible in her handling of the gun. Wouldn't that be ironic if they try? Well, I guess she's got that immunity, but to go after her for a gun crime when they don't want to go after Hunter. See, it goes to show you there is a different set of rules, because do you know what would happen if you or I lied on that form? We wouldn't have got a sweetheart plea deal, and we wouldn't be dealing with some of the cushy treatment that he's receiving. But Hallie took it on herself to take the gun and the bullets and put it in the bag, and decided to drive her car with the bag to Jansen's Market, and then she took the bag and put it in a trash can in front of the store and left. In the insular Biden dynasty, being on the outside is a hostile place. That may be where Hallie, the daughter of a local dry cleaner who married the prince, now finds herself. Something interesting there. A little different take on it from Miranda Devine. One other thing on Hunter. Boy, this hour's going fast. We are going to get into the executive order, or as the media puts it, crackdown on illegal immigration. The Biden administration cracking down. Yeah, 3.5 years too late, and not cracking down, by the way. It's all spin, and we're going to highlight it, as you are well aware by now. But let's take that short break. Stay with us. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom. This is Frankly Speaking. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, ready to have your blood boiling. Oliver Darcy at CNN says America's judicial system apparently not so rigged after all. After spending the last 3 days raging against the courts over Donald Trump's 34 felony convictions, the right-wing media machine jumped at the opportunity to hype the felony charges being brought against Hunter Biden in a trial that got underway Monday. So does hype mean cover it? Is this because the media, the legacy media, hasn't been covering it at all? Is that, and what is, out of curiosity, the right-wing media machine? I've always been curious about that. I mean, he points to Fox News. That's where he goes to right away. Okay. I would think a right-wing media machine needs more than one cog in the machine, but I'll continue. The cognitive dissonance is remarkable to behold. The same media outlets and figures who have told the audiences that there is a two-tier justice system in America are now prominently covering a trial in which Biden's own Justice Department prosecutes his son. If Biden is rigging the justice system, he is doing a lousy job. Again, I think that means you have to completely ignore the sweetheart plea deal that Hunter originally had until his lawyers screwed up royally, until you had that brave judge that was not a part of this machine. And I'm not talking about the right-wing machine, obviously. While there is not a two-tier justice system in this country, there certainly is a two-tiered set of standards that outlets like Fox News apply to the Democrat Party versus the Republican Party. Okay, so again, it's outlets like, again, and this is just a small point, I get it. But what is this machine? So far, you've pointed to two examples, Fox News and Fox News. That hardly makes a machine. So explain to me where this all-powerful right-wing media machine is. But I'll wrap up with what Oliver Darcy has to say. Regardless of what happens in the Hunter Biden trial, already maybe throwing a hint there of what he thinks will happen, Trump media allies will still undoubtedly claim that the justice system is rigged. Let's see, you've got Hunter in Delaware, you had Trump in Manhattan. I mean, this is to ignore what's actually happening. And he doesn't have to believe that it's a rigged system, but he can definitely look at the discrepancies between the two cases if he were fair and honest. But I think that's one of the reasons why CNN's ratings are so disastrous, because they don't even pretend to be fair and honest. But I'm going to continue. If Hunter Biden is acquitted or the jury is hung, the right-wing media machine, again, no examples except for Fox, will use it to further their dishonest narrative that the judicial system is corrupt and only working to target Republicans. But even if Hunter Biden is found guilty, audiences will be told that he got off easy and should have been hit with more severe charges, which is true. I mean, well, we won't even talk about his business dealings. And it's a win-win for MAGA media. Okay, now it's MAGA media, because the space is dominated by outlets and figures who are at their core dishonest, choosing to instead peddle certain narratives for profit and power. Boy, talk about projecting, huh? Talk about the projection in that one. Again, no examples about this MAGA media, this big right-wing media machine, except for one example of Fox News. Okay? So you're already being dishonest and disingenuous by not telling us more. You can't just point to one and tell us that that's some all-powerful machine. Number two, to think that that he has, after all this, realizing the difference. And don't think for a moment Oliver Darcy doesn't realize the differences. The sweetheart plea deal, being in Delaware, the list goes on and on. Don't think for a moment he doesn't realize this. But he calls this MAGA media at their core dishonest, choosing to instead peddle certain narratives for profit and power. Wow. That could be the motto for CNN. That could be their mission statement. Oh, boy, the hypocrisy, but it plays to their crowd. All right, we got to take another short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back, wrapping up hour number one. Unbelievable. Couple things, takeaways that CNN had as we were talking about Oliver Darcy and this delusion that they have about right-wing media. They said takeaways from day 2 of the Hunter Biden federal gun trial. Not a lot of coverage here. But they said that, Biden speaks through his audiobook. They're using that. Talks a little bit about the defense strategy. But I thought this was interesting. Listen to this line. Biden's laptop has been at the center of a years-long political saga, with his team claiming it may have contained fake emails concocted by Russia, while many Republicans herald it as ironclad proof that he and his father got rich from corrupt overseas deals. So they're still pushing the Russian narrative. Isn't that interesting? Prosecutors used the laptop much more narrowly to try and prove that Biden used drugs in 2018. It was still a major moment when prosecutors unveiled the physical laptop for all in the courtroom to see. The silver MacBook has been bandied about in right-wing media for years, and the public saw it for the very first time on Tuesday. Been bandied about by the right-wing media. Another example of CNN blanket statement of right-wing media, this machine that is everywhere. But it's been bandied about. What a weird way of putting that. Now, Lauer will continue to cross-examine Jensen, who will then go through one last round of questions from prosecutors. During their opening arguments, prosecutors read the witnesses they expect to call during the trial in order, signaling that they would call Kathleen Buell, Hunter Biden's ex-wife, to the stand second. So that could happen as soon as today. In filings, prosecutors say that Biden's ex-wife will testify about finding drugs or paraphernalia on multiple occasions in his car. So today is third day with cross-examination of an FBI agent. It is interesting to me for an administration that really for a while was hanging its hat on being tough on gun crimes, how the media twists themselves up not to highlight that fact. Look at all these waves coming in. I keep saying that. So I'm not going to go through what we can expect today. We'll be watching that for ourselves. But I thought that was an appropriate way to end the first hour. There's our look at Hunter Biden. And apparently it's all to blame on some right-wing media machine. And you better please ignore the fact that we were told the laptop was Russian disinformation for years. And also please ignore the fact that he had a sweetheart plea deal that his lawyer got too cocky to take. And that's why we were in this situation. So when they say it's not a rigged system, it's not a two-tier justice system, remember this should be done in the way that they set it up. But you can blame Hunter's lawyer for getting just a little too big for their britches, as the old saying goes. A couple comments here. Hunter is behaving like a predator when he admits that he introduced her to drugs, meaning his brother Bo's wife, who then they became lovers after Bo died. Haley Biden. I was drawing a blank there for a second. Yes, Haley Biden. Sounds like a common thing with him to do with women and girls. If you see that on his laptop, I think it was a common thing with some of the photos of the escorts, we'll say. Next, the timing of Biden's crackdown comes the same week that Hunter is in court. Maybe a distraction with a Trump news fading. That's a very good point. Someone else had that this morning at some opinion piece that I read, that it was a way to take some of the distraction. Because, listen, the media does not want to cover Hunter. Their hand was forced, just like their hand was forced when that sweetheart plea deal fell apart. So if that never fell apart, they wouldn't even cover it. They sometimes had to come all the way back from the beginning and explain why we're here now, because people didn't even know what they were discussing. So, yeah, the media doesn't want to cover this. So this gives them a perfect example of the crackdown, which is a term they're using. Crackdown at the border. After 3.5 years. We'll talk about it, but we are out of time. Hour number 1 in the books. Stay with us for hour number 2 when we return with Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Hour number 2, welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. We do not have a Steuben Senior Services Fund interview this morning because I knew we'd have a lot to catch up on from my day off yesterday. But on tomorrow's Steuben Senior Services Fund interview, it's fan favorite, former Congressman Joe Sempolinski. He'll be joining us. So if you have any questions for the former Congressman, and I should also say current Assembly candidate, as well as the current chair of the Steuben County Republican Party, if you have any questions for Joe Sempolinski, he'll be joining us on tomorrow's broadcast. On Friday, we'll be talking with a fun guest. I always look forward to talking with Tony Pucci. He's the author of the Michael Bishop Mystery Series, local author, and I know I say this a lot when he's going to be on the program, but I love the Michael Bishop series. I've read every one, and I find them to be just a really fun read. So that's why I'm glad that Tony could come back on. That'll be Friday, so don't miss that. And if you haven't, we'll find out where you can buy them. I know you can get them on Amazon, but if you haven't read the Michael Bishop series, I do highly recommend it. I think you'll really enjoy it. All right. Biden announces, this is the big story, crackdown on the border. Now, as the one viewer said in the last hour, is this to take away a little bit of the focus off of Hunter? That very well could be the case. The Biden administration announced an executive order. Now, remember, we were told you could do nothing. Nothing could be done about the border, even though we know that you can't even say day one, but pretty close. I think it was within the first week, got rid of the executive orders that Trump used to protect the border. We're going to talk about that in a moment. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty. that it claims, this is what the administration claims, would shut down the U.S.-Mexico border once illegal crossings hit 2,500 per day between points of entry for 7 consecutive days. A quote-unquote crackdown that will still permit a minimum of 1.8 million new arrivals into America every year, even if enforced properly. Even if it is enforced, strict enforcement is the word I'm looking for. The order, which is expected to take effect immediately, would lift border restrictions 2 weeks after the daily number of crossings averaged 1,500 for 7 days straight. Senior administration officials said in a background call. Talk about a confusing way to do this. The new restrictions include several exemptions, such as allowing migrants to cross the border who use the CBP-1 mobile application at a port of entry, as well as unaccompanied children, victims of a severe form of trafficking, those who face an acute medical emergency or an imminent and extreme threat to life and safety, and other non-citizens who have a valid visa or some other lawful permission to enter the United States. When extreme threat to life and safety, couldn't you say, well, if I go back, I'm going to have to walk back? I mean, isn't there a lot of loopholes? We're going to get to a loophole here in a moment. But even if migration is limited to 2,500 per day for a full calendar year, the number of crossings would hit 912,500 in a year. So that's if this thing works perfectly. Hundreds of thousands more have been allowed into the U.S. using that CBP-1 app. So I don't know why they want people on this app so bad. Now, this gets into a lot of numbers. I don't want to sit here and read all the numbers to you because I know that gets kind of boring. But I like that they're now, after 3.5 years of doing nothing, now, and saying they couldn't do anything, mind you, are now saying, oh, we can do something, but I blame it on Republicans for not signing that bipartisan bill. And you notice how they always say bipartisan. Well, it's very easy to find wishy-washy Republicans to sign on to something to make it bipartisan. But there's a lot of people that said this was too big of a giveaway by Republicans. The border will never be shut down under this executive action, but rather serve to legalize an unjustified level of open borders that will further perpetrate the chaos and lawlessness we've experienced during the entirety of the Biden administration, said former acting Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Mark Morgan. Morgan emphasized that the new order won't end catch and release of migrants, the use of parole, or enhanced enforcement by ICE. It also won't enhance the vetting of migrants caught at the border. Unless those arrested entering illegally are immediately detained and returned, there will be little change. I don't think anything in the vetting system has changed. Cartels will also utilize major loopholes in the plan to continue to smuggle migrants across the border by instructing their customers to make claims that they have a fear of returning home to get released into the country. Yeah, I mean, isn't that what we've been saying, what I just said? You say, I got a fear of returning home. I don't feel safe there. I don't feel safe in the trek back. Thank you. Please let me in. Thompson said of the cartel's operations, you just gave them the answer. They already know how to do this, and they basically are rewriting their business plan based on what the Biden administration outlined. Additionally, unaccompanied minors will be exempt from the rules, with Thomas predicting an influx of those guys as a result. House Speaker Mike Johnson dismissed the executive order as window dressing. It was 126 days ago that Joe Biden said, quote, I've done all I can do, Johnson said. We counted 64 specific executive actions that President Biden and Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas took to open that border wide. They did it intentionally. If he was concerned about the border, he would have done this a long time ago. Yes, he would have done it 3.5 years ago, but also 64 specific executive actions that he used to create this open border. And now, for so long, saying he couldn't do anything, and now, right as Hunter Biden's trial begins, he makes this announcement. And also, because it's not just about Hunter Biden's case, it's also about the debate coming up, because you know that's going to be a major issue. And they're just going to continue to spin it, and I've got examples of that. Representative Tom Suozzi, claimed to the Post that Biden had to take the action because Congress failed to pass a bipartisan piece of legislation. The reality is that under that bill, cases would have been adjudicated in 90 days. And in that 90 days, consistent with the past several decades, 80% of the people at a minimum would be denied and would be immediately deported, Suozzi said. So it gets me a little riled up, he went on. Mike Johnson and others have said to me too little, too late. And my response is, how about 2-0 to never? I'm glad that the president is taking action, etc. Basically, it's shifting the numbers around is what we're looking at here. But I don't know if you've noticed, and I don't know how many of you watch the nightly news or maybe the morning news before this program begins, but everything I saw last night and this morning was crackdown on the border, getting tough, recognizing that it is an election year gamble. And CNN, Stephen Collinson, not happy and already sending out kind of the warning signals to Biden that he may have made a mistake as he's hemorrhaging these progressive votes because of his stance on Israel. This may continue that bleed. And that's very interesting to me. Biden is alienating progressives yet again, but he may have no choice, says Stephen Collinson at CNN. Joe Biden is pushing progressives who are already sour on his presidency to the limit with a tough new executive action, barring most asylum applications from migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally. Well, not most. But the president's weakness on one of Donald Trump's biggest campaign issues means it's a risk that he had to take. He had no other option but to take. People familiar with the Biden strategy pointed out privately that he was in the position of taking bold action on immigration after Republicans in Congress refused to act after killing a bipartisan immigration bill to please the presumptive nominee. That's another line that they've been using, and I don't know where this quote-unquote proof is coming from this, but the idea has been that Trump is the one that had told Republicans not to pass this bipartisan bill. But as we've learned, the bipartisan bill was not some great bill that was going to fix the border, but to the contrary. But what they're admitting here is that, and listen, they know, but Biden is making this all for political moves. And it's not an effective executive order. It's just to make it look like, I was telling somebody this the other day. It reminds me so much of Governor Hochul when it comes to public safety. She'll do something minute on, let's say, bail reform that does absolutely nothing. No benefit whatsoever for our public safety in New York. And what does she do? She gives a press conference saying we're tough on crime, we're tough on public safety, we're bringing public safety to mind. That's what we're having here. Something that will do nothing. We're still talking about 2,500 migrants a day for a full calendar year. Puts it almost at 1 million in a year, and that's if it works 100% correctly. So it's tough to take them at their statement of crackdown and use this kind of language. If Biden wins the November election, it will probably be because he was able to cement the most disaffected liberal Democrats behind him while appealing to moderates and dissenting Republicans who reject Trump's extremism. They don't even hide it anymore at CNN. Many of the latter group feel that the border crisis is a matter of urgent national security, and Biden needs to show he takes the presidential duty of securing the homeland seriously. Do you think, after 3.5 years of not doing that it's too little too late? I don't want to keep using that term because I know many on the right are. But do you believe that, I do believe he wants to attempt that anyway, just like Governor Hochul wants to attempt that she's strong on public safety. But do you think this executive order, now, again, the media is not going to cover it. Keep this in mind, the way it should actually be covered with the 2,500. They're actually being kind of a little critical of him for different reasons because they say he's sounding like Trump, which is just hilarious. But do you think this will convince people that after 3.5 years of doing nothing and saying he could do no more, darn it, I've done all I could do, then just randomly, when the Hunter's trial starts, randomly as we get so close to the presidential debate, he then can do something? It really is unbelievable how just disgusting politics can be sometimes, isn't it? How all he's worried about is November. All right, we've got to take a short break. Our first break of the hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you for all the waves here as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Yay, Joe's going to be on. Great. Yes, tomorrow Joe Sempolinski will be on the program. Former congressman. We always look forward to having him on the program. So if you have any questions for him, please let me know. Keep those waves coming in, by the way. So Biden is alienating progressives yet again, but he may have no choice. So that is the concept from the CNNs of the world. What do you think? Because obviously they've been pushing, and this is, to me, this is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Biden. You may want to change your mind. You may want to appease the progressives. I don't know what that would be. We've seen it with Israel, where he's changed policy, trying to get those young students who are pushing the kind of the pro-Hamas message, that he's trying to win them over. Loud dissent from progressives on Biden's immigration moves. The executive action, which is designed to alleviate the pressure on a hopelessly swamped asylum system, differs in important ways from the draconian policies of Trump, a point Biden was at pains to stress. The draconian... Okay, let's put all this aside. Does this convince voters? Is it tough to say after 3.5 years of telling voters that we can't do anything, we've done all we can do, now to say I'm doing something, and you look at the numbers, and then even if it works perfectly, it'll be nearly 1 million new migrants in America a year. Congressional Progressive Caucus. Oh no, we'll get to that in a moment. I want to go through a few more of these. Amanda Stewart Sproles, a Haley supporter from Arizona. I always like how they just interview one random person that happened to maybe support Haley, told CNN Biden's actions on Tuesday were a show of good faith, and added, they're starting to listen to the center. Well, I guess that maybe does sound like a Haley supporter. I don't know. Biden pulls from Trump's immigration playbook in election year twist, says Zachary Wolf from CNN. That's not a good line. Biden doesn't want to see that headline that Biden pulls from Trump's immigration playbook. This is another, hey, you better settle down, President Biden. President Joe Biden is pulling from former President Donald Trump's immigration playbook as he tries to stop a flow of asylum seekers from around the world who are crossing into the U.S. at the border with Mexico. Unveiled at the White House on Tuesday, Biden's new plan to all but shut down the U.S. border. Oh, it's unbelievable how they twist this. They're going to try their hardest to make sure that you believe after 3.5 years of this open border mess that he is tough now. And by golly, he's all but, interesting way to put that, all but shut down the U.S. border to asylum seekers who cross the border illegally using executive authority Trump once used to bar people, from mostly Muslim countries from entering the U.S. in 2017, and also to bar most asylum seekers in 2018. Okay. Days after Republicans suffered huge setbacks in midterm elections that year. It's an odd election year twist since Biden actually ran his 2020 campaign in part on a promise to revoke those actions, which he did in the months after taking office. Trump's asylum policy was also blocked by federal courts before Biden revoked it. In addition to slowing the flow of asylum seekers, Biden's actions could have... Wait. Slowing the flow? Before it says all but shut down, I'm confused. Biden's actions could have the political effect of chipping away at Trump's lead on the immigration issue and triangulating some middle ground support, even if it leaves progressives angry. I have got to say, if this convinces you, even if you were a Haley supporter, if this convinces you in some way that he's tough on the border now, I mean, then politics is wackier than even I thought. That this is such an election year... lie might be the word. Listen, do you think for one moment if Biden wins re-election, this weak position will stay? Of course not. But it is alienating, and it is interesting to see the left turning on the left. Representative Pramila Jayapal said Tuesday on CNN's The Source that President Biden should not be using an executive order on immigration because that is what, quote, xenophobic racist former President Donald Trump did. We all want to see the immigration system that is orderly, that allows people to be processed quickly, that allows people to come in with different legal pathways, and Republicans have continued to block us in doing that, but not enforcement only actions like what the president is doing today, which mirrors something that Donald Trump did. Let's think about that. They have been trying so darn hard to fix our borders, and Republicans have been fighting it from day one. This is politics at its worst, isn't it, folks? She continued, I think this is a mistake Democrats make over and over again. I've worked on this issue for 20 years. I'm the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee. We make the mistakes of trying to go out Republicans. They're not going to come over to us if they're fighting us on immigration. I think the president could have handled this differently. I've told him that directly. I think we have to lean in as Democrats to an inclusive vision of immigration. We really have to continue to point out all the differences that we have with Donald Trump, who is xenophobic, racist, has said terrible things about immigrants. I know that is not who President Biden is, but using the same tools that Donald Trump used is actually a big problem for Democrats to be able to continue to show these differences and keep our base with us. Another veiled threat to the president. I think the media, I've got to admit this, the media is doing a great job of telling you that the border is now secured, that he might have went too far. He's that tough. So will that convince some people? Perhaps. I can't imagine you don't think, wait a minute, for 3.5 years we had an open, porous border causing all of this trouble, and now we're told by a man who said he could do no more that he's fixed it with an executive order that he could have done 3.5 years ago. I don't know, but are people paying enough attention to that? I don't believe, if you look at that Nikki Haley supporter that CNN found, if they believe that this was a great move, I don't think that's someone that would have ever went to Trump anyway. Now, the Border Patrol agent, and what is the exact name here? 5 Border Patrol agents told the New York Post, the president's inaction for 3.5 years has already resulted in irreparable damage to the country's national security, and they feel this latest measure is all for show. I'd agree with that. I would also mention that no matter whatever you think about this executive order, it is important to note the real threat we still have. I mean, obviously 1,000 or 1 million people a year coming in anyway with a tough executive order, but I'm saying about, we talked about the real threat of terrorist attacks and the like. So this doesn't even take into effect the gotaways that we hear so much about. But I'll continue. They're trying to, let me try again. That's like trying to plug the leak on the Titanic with chewing gum. It's way too little too late. He's trying to act tough on the border, but we know he's been the most open border administration ever. Despite the measures being billed as a crackdown, it will still permit 1.75 million new arrivals to the U.S. when the 2,500 a day are added to others allowed into the country through the CBP One Phone app. So the number here, according to the New York Post, both were from the New York Post, but if you take into account that app for some reason, you're looking at 1.75 million in a year. The order, which is expected to take effect immediately, lifts border restrictions 2 weeks after the number of crossings average 1,500 for 7 consecutive days. Again, I know, gets all really wonky. But one agent said, what a joke. Like, that's going to stop them. He can enact whatever he wants. Until we deport everyone that crosses or imprisons them, it will not stop. Another agent saying that's comical. Millions are in the U.S. now, and it's just now that they realize the number of crossings a day is a problem. The damage is done, and now the administration wants to slowly close the valve on the floodgates. Well, they don't even care about that. They don't want to really close the borders or the floodgates. They don't want that at all. But they're worried about November. And what happens if they think if they lie to you or say, push something after 3.5 years, that all of a sudden, okay, the polls show that that's not popular. After 3.5 years, we'll change it. Just minuscule change it. Maybe that will convince you to vote for him. Yeah, and you can find this at the New York Post. They interviewed quite a few Border Patrol agents, and pretty much the same was said by each, that it's a joke. Just give me the power. Where is the border? The Border Patrol. Oh, no, this is, okay, I thought that was a quote from that. This was Trump. Give me the Border Patrol, give me the people, the judges, give me the people who can stop this and make it work right. That's what he said about the supposed bill. The president has since changed his tune, with polling consistently showing that ahead of the November presidential election, American voters are increasingly concerned with illegal immigration, and enhanced border enforcement ranked as a top concern for voters. According to him, he couldn't do an executive order for the order for that, only Congress. So has he been lying to us? Such a cover your butt, we'll say, waste of time, a fifth agent said. Yeah, have you been lying to us for the last 3.5 years? What changed? The loopholes include allowing admission for migrants who either make claims of fear of returning to their home countries are unaccompanied minors, are victims of trafficking, or have medical emergencies. You just gave them the answers, Thomas said, of the cartel's operation. They already know how to do this, and they are basically rewriting their business plan. Like I said, yeah, you basically said, here are the ways that you're allowed in. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Stay with us. Maybe it's slowing down because they're all here. Anyone in the right mind knows what a farce this lie is. Nonsense, said a viewer. Yeah, I think so, but the media, like I said, I believe the media is doing an effective propaganda job of telling you that the border is going to be secure. Toughest we've seen in years. And you go, years? I wonder if that's like 3.5 years. And there's a couple other, the crackdown terminology that they use. They know how to push a narrative, that is for sure. But we've got to take a break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I did want to mention and remind you that coming up, starting tomorrow, Colonial Days and Painted Post. I'll be mentioning it tomorrow as well, but Miss Colonial Days pageant starts tomorrow at 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. Then you've got Rock the Block, the music on the June 7th, the 8th, the Colonial Days Parade, of course, Craft Fair on the 7th and 8th, and Chicken Barbecue on the 8th as well. I want to mention Miss Colonial Days we had Lisa on last week to talk about, and it sounds like it's going to be a very nice time, so don't miss out on that. Okay, back to the discussion here on, let's see, immigration, but I was looking for the exact quote here. It was on Fox News Channel's Your World. Mayorkas responded to concerns that the exemptions for unaccompanied children in the immigration executive action will result in cartels taking advantage of that by stating, quote, "We are taking it to the cartels." What? Neil Cavuto asked, quote, "There are a number of exemptions for this, including unaccompanied children. And isn't that a green light for drug cartels to take advantage of that? And the whole purpose of this sort of blows up in your face?" Mayorkas answered, "Absolutely not." Okay. But who's going to watch those unaccompanied children? If they're allowed in, you don't ship them back. You don't do anything like that. So where are they going to go? Mayorkas responded, "Neil, we deal with unaccompanied children in a humanitarian way, adhering to our values. We deter irregular migration. We build lawful pathways. We have programs for minors." So Cavuto kind of interrupted and said, "But this encourages drug cartels to take advantage of those kids, does it not, sir?" Mayorkas answered, "Neil, we're taking it to the drug cartels with unprecedented strength through our transnational criminal investigative units, through our immigration and customs enforcement." Cavuto, this was a tough place to go. He said, no, this is actually a green light for those cartels. Isn't that the fear, that this is actually green lighting and they'll say, "Oh, guys, well, we can use these kids as pawns to get what we want"? Neil, let me be clear. The cartels and smuggling organizations are unscrupulous. They exploit individuals of all different types of vulnerabilities. We are taking it to the cartels. We're exempted unaccompanied children from the asylum bar because of their compelling humanitarian picture they present. We're going to adhere to our values while we take tough enforcement measures, which is what we have done. Wow. Tough enforcement measures. Good. The GOP has been ripping into the Biden administration over this, calling it desperate, an election year charade, and that Biden is gaslighting you. Make no mistake, whatever half measures Joe Biden is taking on the border are driven solely by political concerns, said Tom Cotton. If Biden wins, he will remove any remaining barriers to illegal alien crossing. And that's what I was saying earlier, that if he wins re-election, especially being a lame duck, you will see this executive order by the wayside, and you will see a return to the open, porous border that he has been, which was a goal of his for the last 3.5 years. Now he has to act tough. So 3.5 years worth of damage. Also now he can look tough and hopefully dupe you into a vote come November if you are strong on immigration. Josh Hawley saying while Biden has been talking tough on the border, he's been secretly carrying out a mass amnesty policy. He should explain that to the American public and how that is remotely legal. Heritage Foundation tweeting out, President Biden has done nothing for 3 years and counting to stop the border crisis. 3.5 and counting to stop the border crisis. The crisis is so bad, Homeland Security special agents were pulled from investigations on child trafficking and fentanyl to help handle the invasion. Senator Ted Cruz saying at the start of his presidency, Biden inherited the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. All he had to do was nothing. Just sit and leave the border alone. Instead, he deliberately broke the system. And how many, I can't remember what number. Oh, I'll get to this in a moment because Mike Johnson has a bigger comment here. It was a joint statement by Steve Scalise, Tom Emmer, Elise Stefanik, and Mike Johnson. They called the executive order nothing more than a desperate political stunt to try and stabilize his plummeting poll numbers. From his first day in office, Biden has worked to implement a failed open border agenda, which created this historic humanitarian and national security catastrophe. He has turned every American community into a border community and opened our country to violent criminals, terrorists, cartels, and poisonous drugs. This executive action does nothing to end parole abuses or catch and release. It continues the administration's abuse of the CBP One app. It does not re-implement President Trump's successful Remain in Mexico policy. It provides no new resources for Border Patrol. It does nothing to deport the millions who have poured over our open border every year since Biden took office. And it will still allow scores of additional illegal immigrants to flood into our country before any so-called shutdown authority kicks in. Over a year ago, House Republicans passed the Secure the Border Act, which would actually fix the problem. But Joe Biden and Senate Democrats continue to drag their feet on taking meaningful actions, sacrificing the safety and security of our communities. 126 days ago, Joe Biden stated, "I've done all I can do to fix the border catastrophe." Today, he'll announce an executive action using the same authority he denied having. If he was actually concerned about our wide open border, he would have acted a long time ago. The fact is that Biden took over 300 executive actions during his first year alone, which caused this crisis we're seeing at our border. So those were a couple quick comments. You can find a list of them. I think it was at the New York Post. No, I don't remember where I found this. But so many people weighing in. And we know it is what it is. It's an election year gamble. Do you think, and here's a question, do you think it will lose him the progressives even more? That's what CNN's presenting, and some other leftist kind of publications suggesting that maybe he has to take that calculated effort. But boy, this is bad. The left, but boy, it's tough to say that they're progressive. They act like they're a fringe group now, but these groups seem to be the majority, or the most vocal anyway, when it comes to the Democrat Party. It's going to be interesting. But as the New York Post editorial board said, it's no surprise Biden's border crackdown is all spin. And this is what we were saying originally, that as we know, this doesn't take some brilliant political mind, it is obvious that this is all about votes. And will that be effective? Will the votes he gets, and I'm not sure where those votes will come from, maybe more moderate Democrats, if there is such a thing, will say, oh, I like this, I can be more confident voting for him, maybe, because he's losing the progressives with his stance, even though it's a weak stance on Israel and his stance here. But doing nothing is not an option, President Biden declared after 3+ years, when he did far worse than nothing, as he offered up a scheme that still won't do much. That's what the New York Post said. We're going to tell you a little bit more about that, but that's a good point. Doing nothing is not an option. It was for the last 3.5 years. Now it's not. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hasselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So as we're saying, the New York Post editorial board says President Biden's new executive order is simply a deceitful press stunt he hopes will shore up his rock-bottom ratings from voters on the border crisis. The order will allow the president to shut down the border when crossing between points of entry tops 17,500 over 7 consecutive days, a level that permits nearly 1 million illegal entrants a year. And that's on top of close to another million or so entering via the countless legal pathways he has created without congressional approval, such as his CPB-1 scheduling program. So his new limits still mean historic highs of continued border jumping, double the highest figure under Donald Trump. The figures don't even include up to 800,000 plus a year gotaways, those spotted but not stopped, which is terrifying because we talk about the terrorist implications there. That's become standard under the Biden administration. And it doesn't add in nor the unknown number who sneak in completely undetected. Plus, of course, he claimed back in January of 2023, most would-be illegal crossers would be increasingly subject to expedited removal to their country of origin and subject to a 5-year ban on re-entry, but never enforced that rule. And he's still explicitly exempting, unaccompanied minors from being turned away, guaranteeing a renewed flood of kids. This looks like just one more in a long string of phony fixes, another effort to do nothing while insisting he's gotten tough. He's delivered an endless series of lies on the issue, as everywhere else, repeatedly insisting the border is secure, then claiming he has no authority to take any action unless Congress acts. I've done all that I can, Biden claimed just months ago. I do like that thought, and I forgot about that. No, the border is secure. And then when they started seeing the polls come in, I've done all I could do. Now he admits he can act, it turns out. In fact, he has had the power to set the level at 0, not 17,500 a week, 5 months before Election Day, and as 7 voters in 10 say Biden has mostly failed on border security. Wow, 7 out of 10. Biden acted dramatically to open the border the day he took office. He refused to reverse himself even as the mix of migrants swelled from Central America, of the initial surge to include every nation on the planet. And he's offered nothing but bogus fixes ever since. Even if his new order does finally actually slow the tide from unsustainable levels, mind you, to merely, or from these unsustainable levels to maybe a merely unstable state. I'm just going to move on. Voters have to wonder if he'll reverse it the day after the election. I think that's what we've been saying on the program really all morning. Okay, let's say you're almost convinced. You feel that Biden's finally doing something. He realizes the importance, like that one Nikki Haley voter said, well, maybe he's starting to realize, okay, let's say you accept that premise. Do you believe day one, especially being a lame duck president, if he were reelected, do you believe he would keep this in effect? Or do you believe it's another 4 years where he has nothing to worry about? 4 years of an open, porous border. I think you know. And hold him to account for the millions of illegal immigrants he's already waved in and giving mass amnesty to secretly. And the hundreds of thousands of this plan will continue to wave in. America's border nightmare won't end until the country has a new leader in the White House. That's New York Post editorial board. I thought it was a good point. I think it's one worth mentioning because the media is going to do everything they can to dupe you into believing this is a tough policy when it is not. As Andrew Arthur, and he's the fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies, said, Biden is only pretending to solve the border crisis he created, much to the New York Post point that is all about spin. Yes, this is just to give the media a talking point so then they can try to convince all of us that he has been tough on immigration. They will ignore, keep in mind, the media will ignore that he was silent on it and said he could silent first, saying it was secure, and then saying he's done all he could do. So for 3.5 years, keeping the border open, even though he signed those executive orders early on in that first month to get rid of Trump's policies that created this, since created this open porous border, now saying he's tough talking. Now, I'm not going to go, this piece goes from Andrew Arthur, goes pretty wonky in the numbers, but it's even worse than that. His own Department of Justice has shown little willingness to defend that authority in suits brought by immigrant advocates who attack nearly identical but more effective Trump policies before liberal judges. Will Biden's lawyers change their tack now that this administration's policies are in the dock? Maybe, but don't be surprised if this proposal is quickly blocked in the courts, at which point the White House will pivot and again blame congressional inaction for the state of affairs at the U.S.-Mexico line. As I told Congress in March, the president already has all the tools he needs to secure the border. Trump did it, and so did Obama. The only difference is they had the will. Congress can't legislate that, meaning the will. And to the one viewer's point before we go to break, we're not going to talk too much about this, but Michael Goodwin says it's a cynical power play aimed at keeping his son Hunter out of prison and him in the White House. So we'll talk about that. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We'll be right back. And we are back, frankly speaking, here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, thank you again for joining us this morning as we're getting ready to wrap things up. I wanted to mention a couple of quick things. First of all, I received this in my email. I know you're going to want to mark your calendar if you are a resident of Corning. The City of Corning Comprehensive Plan Update Open House will be held on the 13th from 4:30 till 7 p.m. at the Corning Paint and Post High School cafeteria. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. Also, don't mark your calendars, but set your alarm, because tomorrow morning, right around 7 o'clock, and I'm going to say, everybody likes when Joe Sempolinski's on the program, but there's always that little bonus, not guaranteed, but sometimes he's here right at 7. We talk for the full hour. Sometimes he's here at 6:45. So you have to tune in the whole morning to get as much of Joe Sempolinski as you possibly can. And since the last time we talked, look how much has changed. We now have a convicted felon Trump label. We have Hunter Biden that we can talk about. That's just on the national level. Obviously, we can talk about local, as the former congressman is also running for assembly and is also on, or I should say chairman of the I always want to say New York State, the Steuben County Republican Committee. I always give him a little bit of an increase there in his position. So Joe Biden is making a cynical power play. That's according to Michael Goodwin. And the idea is that he releases for a couple of reasons. You've got the debate coming up. And when I'm saying this, I mean the executive order. But also because you've got Hunter's story in the news. That's a major, and it really is. I've got to say that, no, the media isn't covering it as effectively as they should. We know that. And in many cases, they have to play catch up because they have not filled people in on what is happening with Hunter for a very long time. But they are forced, their hand is forced to cover it. So in Michael Goodwin's mind, this is, well, he says, Joe Biden has boasted that he knows how to use power, and recent days have featured a president skillfully manipulating the unique might of the Oval Office to protect his family and advance his own reelection chances. None of his maneuvers, including the pretend border crackdown, will make America safer or better or more united, but those are not Biden's goals. He's making a cynical power play aimed at keeping his son out of prison and keeping himself in the White House. The sequence began last Thursday with the conviction of Donald Trump. It was a travesty of justice, a tangled web spun out of odds and ends that should never have been in a courthouse. But against all decency, New York Democrats pushed it over the line. Their success gave most Americans another reason to mistrust government and law enforcement. We've talked about it when it comes, and I can't go through all this because Michael Goodwin writes a 6-page piece dissecting all this. You can find it for yourself at the New York Post. But I think to that viewer's comment earlier, there is a point though, of the timing on this. We have learned, and I don't know if you can trust it, but anonymous sources saying that Biden is just in misery over the Hunter case, that it's just another, well, and this is how the media pushes it, another tragedy in the Biden family legacy. That is how they are covering it. But this is what that's what they're saying behind the scenes. But I'm looking at this, and this ties in with immigration. Mayor Eric Adams out of New York City, of course, said yesterday that the Post, meaning the New York Post, was right when it exposed the Biden administration's botched mass amnesty program for migrants, like the teen now suspected of shooting 2 city cops. Now, if you follow Republican politics and some Republican talking heads or politicians online, you know about this mass amnesty. You will not see this on the legacy media, but Adams cited the Post's exclusive reporting at a press conference when talking about Bernardo Castro Mera, the 19-year-old Venezuelan who crossed into the United States illegally in Texas in July of 2023. And ended up allegedly shooting the finest in Queens on Monday. So just more on this mass amnesty. I know I'm running around. I always do this at the end because I have so many things I still want to get to. We are going to talk, and I highlighted this at the I think it was in the 6 o'clock hour, but some things being said about Biden behind the scenes. Before we take a break, though, I wanted to mention, I think this ties in when we talk about re-election chances, whether it's trying to convince people that he's strong on immigration or whether he changes his policy on Israel to appease that faction of his party that is pro-Hamas. There's also this that I think plays in what really, at the end of the day, they tell us, no, there's nothing to see here with inflation. You're actually doing great. Your grocery bills just may not show it. Almost 2/3 of Americans considered middle class said they are facing economic hardships and don't anticipate a change for the rest of their lives. What? 2/3 of middle class, they word it kind of strange here, but 2/3 of middle class Americans said they are facing economic hardship. Wow. Again, but they tell us everything's fine. You just don't quite understand the numbers. You're not there. We also, how am I doing? Let me take a break. So I just have a little bit of time here at the end to go through a couple things quickly. You're going to want to buckle in. We do have this comment from a viewer. Looking forward to hearing from JS as usual. Yes, Joe Sempolinski will be our guest tomorrow morning right around 7. So make sure you tune in. Fan favorite, Joe Sempolinski. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. It's hard to believe how fast this program goes and how at one point we were actually only 1 hour. It's hard to think back to those times. Thank you for all the nice comments. Every time I say Joe's on, that's such nice comments. Joe Sempolinski on the program tomorrow. So the Wall Street Journal is reporting that behind the scenes, mostly Republicans, but some Democrats, admitting, though anonymously, that Biden displays signs of decline in the private meetings they're having with him. They spoke to 45 lawmakers. Most of the people interviewed by the outlet who were critical of Biden's performance were Republicans, to be fair, although some Democrats said the president showed his age in several exchanges. These interviewees participated in meetings with Biden or were briefed on them, including administration officials and other Democrats who did not express concerns about how the president handled the meeting. When meeting with congressional leaders in January to negotiate a deal for funding to Ukraine, Biden spoke so softly at times that some people struggled to hear him. 5 people familiar with the meeting told the Wall Street Journal the president read from notes to make obvious points, paused for extended periods of time, and even closed his eyes for so long that some people in the meeting wondered if he had tuned out. Kevin McCarthy saying, I used to meet with him when he was vice president. I'd go to his house. He's not the same person. You can find this at the Wall Street Journal. We don't have time to go through all of it, but just saying he's not the same person that he was. New York Post has kind of a summary of it. You couldn't be there and not feel uncomfortable, one person said of the Ukraine meeting. Biden's demeanor and grasp of policy detail varied by the day, and he frequently relied on notes and deferred to aides during conferences. Others in attendance recalled that it took Biden about 10 minutes from when he entered the room to get the meeting started, and when he did, he used note cards to make obvious points, as I mentioned. Much of the conversations didn't include him. Just interesting. Take it however you want. Just something I'm passing along. Also, and this could be a timing issue too, Newsweek is saying RFK Jr.'s popularity has collapsed. Now, it's hard to collapse from 12%, but okay. According to polling, the 538, he has seen his favorability ratings decline from 42.1% to 35.3%. It's a change from a net score of plus 15.5 to now minus 6.6. Now, that's on favorability. Obviously, we're not talking about voting numbers here. Similar data from the Hill showed that on June 4, Kennedy had a 42.3% favorability rating. 1 year later, 48.4% of people rated him unfavorable. Now, what's the difference? Why is this coming out now? Because it's not as if he's been extra outspoken. It's not as if he did the presidential debate or something like that. So why is it just because we're supposed to believe the polls? I know we've had this conversation numerous times on the program. We don't believe polls. And I don't want to see RFK Jr. win or take votes away from Trump or whatever. I just find it really interesting that now, as Biden administration poll after poll not showing he's not doing that well, now we hear that RFK, his popularity's collapsed. He shouldn't even be thinking about the debate. Don't even waste your vote. Don't even look at him. So that's from Newsweek if you're interested. Hey, Trump's attorneys are requesting to have the gag order lifted after the guilty verdict and before the presidential debate. I had not even thought about that. That was maybe being ignorant or naive, that he would technically still be under a gag order during the presidential debate. They're requesting to have a gag order imposed. Former President Donald Trump's attorneys are requesting to have a gag order imposed on him during his business records trial lifted in the aftermath of his guilty verdict and ahead of the presidential debate at the end of June. Todd Blanche, Trump's attorney, wrote a letter to Judge Juan Merchan, who has overseen Trump's trial, arguing that the gag order should be lifted in light of the recent conviction. Imagine how that would change the makeup of that debate and what kind of questions CNN would go out of their way to ask him. Because could you imagine? They also get to get him thrown in jail. I mean, it'd be win-win. Oh, my gosh. We are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody who joined us. As I said, tomorrow, former Congressman Joe Sempolinski will be our guest, so make sure you tune in. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, starting at 6 for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I look forward to it already. Have a great day.